Hey guys, Dane here, Adaptive Exercise and Rehab, coming back to another video, this one detailing Keto Quad and the workout that I did with him for adaptive exercise the other day. Sweet. So starting off with this session, just like every other session, we start off by stretching the client out. So with Jake, I have a pretty good idea of what his body's going to do and how his body's going to be moving. So I knew that with stretching him, it was just kind of working through some tension points in his shoulders that I really wanted to put the most emphasis on. So in the video here, you'll see me start pressuring through his shoulder joint and applying pressure through his deltoid and pec complex to be able to stretch those tissues up and out and be able to move them through space. As I stretch out his legs, you'll notice I put not that much effort into it because not a whole lot of spasticity, not a whole lot of tone. Wasn't something that I was putting a whole lot of emphasis on with him too, is like the contractibility of his legs either too. The main kind of portion main emphasis of the session was to try to get his core active with stim and then have his upper body working through an open chain type movements that allowed him to have more freedom and more stability. But going back to stretching, like I was saying, most of the effort was put into his shoulders to try to stretch out his shoulder girdle. And then I went ahead and applied some pressure through his lats and then his rotator cuff muscles too. I did a pin and stretch technique to be able to help stretch those muscles out to get him limbered up and ready to go. From there, I got a clip of how he transfers from his chair to the table. It's a typical popover transfer, but with him, with his injury level, it's really cool because he's a quadriplegic. Isn't necessarily what you'd expect from somebody with that injury level, but his triceps are functioning so well and his pecs active, so he's able to pop over too. So you can kind of see how that transfer kind of goes about. But in terms of the exercises that I wanted to do, I kind of wanted to focus on 4 exercises in total. So the first one was going to be an open chain exercise. It was going to be an L-sit. So basically what I did is I put yoga blocks on either side of Jake so that he could press himself up and basically simulate a popover transfer for himself, and so that he could repeat it quite a bit. But what I did is I put counterweight on his legs. So I put 20 pounds on each leg, pulling his legs straight on up into space so that when he lifted, his legs lifted with him. So that quickly became a open chain movement so that he was able to kind of move his body through space left and right. And then one thing that I made an emphasis of with this session too was putting abdominal stim and then lower back stim on concurrently, and having those both basically on the entire session. And I would do one set without stim and then one set with stim too. So you can see with the first set right here, it's a little unstable in his kind of torso area, kind of folding forward if he gets his head too far forward, and then kind of coming backwards as well then too, but that's why I have the backrest up, so make sure that he's safe. But in the second set, you can see that his core becomes a lot more stable. He's a little more upright too, and the stability behind his trunk movements a little bit more controlled also. In hindsight, I probably could have turned the stimulation up a little bit too with him to make him have a little bit more erect posture and have him a little more kind of a better overall posture in general. But he was telling me that it was feeling okay and I didn't want to go too far with that. So yeah, L-sits were the first exercise that we did. We shot for 2 sets, 10 to 15 repetitions per side or per set. And then from there, we basically just kind of talked over like how it felt for him and where the tension points were, where the challenges were, and how he kind of felt it to apply over into practicality, over into his activities of daily living too, because that's how I gotta try to practice as much as possible. From there, I got a quick video. I thought it was really cool of how he went from basically a supine position to a prone position, so from on his back to onto his stomach. Something that I haven't seen anybody with his injury do, so I got a video of that, which I thought was pretty cool. You can see him basically grab his legs, and then he kicks himself on over, and then I think he asked for help right at the end, but from there it was a pretty seamless movement. But the second movement that I wanted to work on was I call it a flying push-up. So basically we're trying to work the person semi into a quadruped stance. But basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to solidify their knees down onto the table and then have their core and then their hips be active. So you can see with this position right here, I have Jake, he's down in a face down position right off the bat too. So I'm able to come off to the side, bring the weights down for him, and then from there we were able to basically get him in position. So I was really actually quite worried about getting the weights in position right off the bat too, because you can see where it's positioned on his hands. Seems a little potentially off to the side, and then with the grip in his hands too, it's kind of where shooting forward his hands were right off the bat. But you can tell once he got the motion down, this first push-up right here, hand slid right out in front of him. So it's kind of like a, hey, maybe we modify this a little bit here too, but he knew pretty quickly of how to modify his own body and be able to make sure it worked for him. And you can see myself right here too. I'm spotting through his hips, basically giving him an artificial core. So those first few reps right there, I wasn't really happy with how things were moving. I wanted to make sure that he was safe too. So I kind of just want to talk to him about it and say, hey, we should do this, that, the other thing right here too. And then kind of like where I had the end all be all movement kind of coming into play. As we take for the second go around right here, he's a lot more stable, but I also have the stimulation on his cores too. But from there, you can see his arm starts to go way overhead. So I was basically programming him to try to do a quadruped position. So kicking back onto his knees, a push up, and then one arm back, and then a press down. One arm back, and then a press down right here. So with this movement right now, he's working through push-ups, just making sure he's getting his positioning right. And then from there, I believe I cue him to hold his quadruped position, and then work his hand up, and then hand back down. You can see I get nervous right off the bat there too, because he's kind of flying a little bit too far forward. But as we work through the third portion of it right here in this next video, this is the one where he really dials it in and it becomes a lot more fluid, because he's actually able to learn from how his body mechanics are working from the first two sets. And then from there, he's able to basically bring his elbow back into position, keep his shoulders and core stable relatively, and then be able to press right and then left too. So this movement right here, this is what I was ideally shooting for throughout too. But that's also one of the reasons why I'd asked Jake to do this exercise with me, is because he'll find different points of challenge and different points, different sticking points for folks with his condition to be able to find a new value, find a new point that's going to challenge them too. So that's what I was really encouraged by too. But yeah, so this right here, this is the end all be all for me. That's what I was shooting for. And it was interesting to kind of see him kind of flow through the movement and see what worked best for him. From there, I got him into a standing frame. The standing frame's really standard. Nothing crazy about this. The only thing that was different is we had just recently retrofitted it with a backpack strap. So you can see this basically goes over the top of his shoulders, right, over the top of his chest, and then buckles down over the, basically off to the side of him then too. So I wanted to try this with Jake because he's really well spoken. He has a great idea of how his body's kind of functioning, where things are kind of going from there. So you can see I pumped him all the way up, and I did pump him up first to make sure that it didn't like kind of tighten on him as he was standing. So as he's situated in a standing position right here, then I'm able to situate it down onto him. And that worked out really well. He got pretty lightheaded right off the bat too, just because he hasn't done an adaptive session in quite some time. But we brought him back down, and then we can bring it back up, and then his heart's pretty well fixated too. But yeah, this was kind of the highlight of my session right here, was once we got him up and we did this pulling movement right here. You can see as we get him up into position, I don't think Jake's danced in a standing position in quite some time, but with the backpack strap that we had on him, he felt pretty confident to be able to kind of move and groove a little bit too, and I was, able to do that with him. I also reset his hips for him too, because he was saying it felt like he was sitting in a wheelchair still. So with that, I was just able to work into a posterior pelvic, or get him out of a posterior pelvic tilt and anteriorly pelvic tilt his hips. The third movement that we worked for was this lat pull down, but this bar basically has different rungs that can go out, so you can kind of spread out wide and do a kind of a wider grip, but you can also do a narrow grip then too. So we worked through a bunch of different movements on that. Same thing going with this exercise right here too. I basically started to stimulate his core while he was doing this too, so I was able to provide less assistance to his torso and his rib cage to be able to hold stability. You can see also with this movement too, I'm definitely in the danger zone too, because the bar and the weight's flying directly over my head, but that allows me to have the best leverage point to be able to spot him then. And then from there, I just brought the standing frame forward, checked to make sure the blood pressure was okay, and we were able to turn the stim off and then do set number 2. With that, I thought that was a really awesome movement because he was able to work through different points of tension again too, and then also work out wide and then work narrowly, more narrow also. Again, another reason why I asked Jake, going back to just how well spoken he is, he's able to tell me good feedback points of, hey, I felt it, in my lower rhomboids, or felt it in my, upper traps, or rear delts, or something of the sort like that too. He gives a lot more feedback and a lot more detailed feedback too, which is fantastic. And then the last movement, I had a few more things that I wanted to do with him, but unfortunately I wasn't able to plan to get the timing down, unfortunately. So the last thing I wanted to do, since we did a push, pull, or is a push, and then a pull, I wanted to finish up with one more push exercise that he hadn't done. And this was a relatively new exercise that we've had, I don't know, ever since we've gotten the quad machine, I believe, which is about 2 years. But it's called a Viking press, so it's a landmine press with a dual handle attachment to it. So with this exercise, basically I pump them up into place first, get my bar suspended, and then I put my handle on from there, and then I get his hands on after that. And that's a pretty good standard kind of procedure to make sure things are kind of operating for you. Actually, it doesn't even look like I have a resistance band on him here because I know that he's super strong. But you can see as Jake is starting to work through this movement right here too, I basically have to apply extra manual resistance for him to be able to get him the right amount of resistance. I found with this piece of equipment, it's a lot more challenging to take hands off, take the bar off, put weight on, put the bar back on, and then hands back on to get the right resistance dialed in. So that's why I would usually just choose to use my own resistance instead, and that works out a lot better and it's a lot more easy too. The same thing goes with this exercise too. I had the stimulation on his lower back and his abdomen to make sure that his core was a little bit more kind of tucked into place. Also helped with blood pressure regulation too. He is a little bit more extended, I'm wanting, on this position right here too. You can see with his hips being more forward than his knees, and then also his shoulders too. But he was saying it felt like a good stretch on his hips, so I wanted to keep him there. But yeah, that's what we did for exercise. So to kind of summarize it up, we did L-sits to kind of work on an open chain transfer, pop over transfer type motion. So we were straight pressing up, moving from one side to the other, forward, backward, with and without stimulation. Second was the flying push-up. So that's where we basically were working on the quadruped position and then working one hand up, pushing back down, one hand up, back down from there, trying to keep the shoulders stable. Third from there, we got him standing with the seatbelt strap on the standing frame, but then we tried the lat pull down with the different rungs on the outsides, middle, and then the insides as well then too. And then lastly, number 4 was the Viking press, and that's where I applied manual resistance and manual pressure to him to make sure that it was kind of the right pressure point for him. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment on the video, and if you guys like the video, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks again. Catch you in the next one.